And that takes us to album number 3, which I get the first take on. But before I start blabbering away, Matt, what are we listening to?
So this is Terence Trent D'Arby, who actually doesn't even go by Terence Trent D'Arby anymore. He changed his name to,
Yep.
what is it? Sonata Maitira? I don't know.
Sananda Maitreya, I believe is.
Okay.
Yeah.
Or
Yeah, because when I
Maitreya.
was searching for it on Spotify, it wasn't giving me the because it gave me the new name. So anyway, at this time he was still Terence Trent D'Arby, and this is introducing the hard line according to Terence Trent D'Arby. Comes in at number 345 in the 1980s on Best Ever Album. 7, number 2,220 of all time. It is Terence Trent D'Arby's highest rated album on Best Ever Albums. Did not make Rolling Stone's list, and Terence Trent D'Arby is ranked number 1,580 of overall artist rankings on Best Ever Albums.
So, like, you can't change your name with me without me doing a little bit of a homework on what's
Yeah.
going on there. And I found out that this was apparently inspired by a dream that Sananda slash Terrence, right, had in the 90s that sort of led him to this new name. And I think it was 2001, because I remember it being shortly after, like, 9/11. But it was not inspired by 9/11. He had these dreams leading up to it, and it just so happened that it went there. So that was that. But in the course of this, like, the only thing I really was ever remembered about Terence Trent D'Arby was, like, he was viewed as a really big deal, and I remember hearing that, and then, like, he just disappeared, kind of. And I remember that he had a pretty, like, he kind of got known for a quote he had where he said his album was the best album since, like, Sergeant Pepper's, or a little bit of, like, Noel Gallagher, like, sort of boasting along the way.
Yeah.
But I think he's kind of since said that it was designed to get people talking, which it did, because he was sort of looked at as the next big star. But I guess he was very ambitious, and I guess it just never panned out. I know he was a heartthrob. I sent you guys that really funny clip. Apparently he had an affair with Bob Geldof's wife.
Oh,
And,
right.
like, yeah, like, I guess Bob Geldof confronted him in the most English way possible about whether it was, and he sort of, it was happening. And that led to an interesting rabbit hole where that woman was, I guess, an English presenter who sort of died young and was a whole sort of, like, has become a cause de celebre, friend of Princess Di type deal. So anyway, there are a lot of rabbit holes I chased down this one. So then I wanted to get back to this album, and I really like this album quite a bit. It has, for those that might be familiar with what kind of came later from the 90s, it has a little bit of, like, what Babyface does in the 90s a little bit. I saw some real similarities between what Terence Trent D'Arby, Sananda Maitreya were doing. I was familiar with 2 songs on this album, one of which I knew I was, Wishing Well, which was a relatively big song. I don't know if I was as familiar with the fact that he did Sign Your Name, another song that I recognized pretty much immediately from this album as well. So there were 2 tracks that came in, and they were spread throughout the album. One was track 3 and one was track 9. But this was definitely a R&B singer-songwriter type of album. It's very funky. His voice was the real standout to me. He has a very versatile voice. It can go high. It can doesn't drop down to, like, deep, but it can go almost to, like, a richer baritone when needed. He plays around with it a lot during the tracks, and so it saves the album from ever sounding samey, right? Because he's doing different takes on sort of R&B and soul music.
Yeah.
I think in his mind, this album, and it was designed to be very, very eclectic, and it was. And considering the fact that he was a very young, relatively young performer at this point, I think he was, like, in the military, and then he was the bad discharge, right? The why am I forgetting? Dishonorably discharged, yes, from it, and then he started performing in Europe, and then he kind of made this album, and this was the album. So from that end of things, it's kind of remarkable, actually, when you think about it, that he had this level, and you could see why he popped as, like, a future star to people that might have been listening. But yeah, this is a different version of like what R&B was. A lot of what we've heard so far of R&B in the mid to late 80s was more quiet storm R&B or like adult contemporary standards R&B, and that will continue to be very much a thing in the early 90s, you know, early Mariah Carey, Luther Vandross, right? A continuation of Anita Baker. There's, you know, there's more, right? I'm just going off the top of my head right there. That lane is there, but this is sort of, like I said before, it's that baby face type of R&B, right? Where it has some roots to rock, some to singer-songwriter, some to R&B and smooth soul. He doesn't sound totally like him, but that lane also is populated by people like, you know, like D'Angelo and stuff a little later, like the neo soul stuff that comes. I wouldn't call Terence Trent D'Arby neo soul in terms of what that sounds like, but it's a very, I felt like a very modern album. And one thing that stood out too, Josh or Matt, is that even though it's 1987, this doesn't sound like an 80s album as much. The production sounds way more like a 90s album, I would say. And you could clearly tell that Terence Trent D'Arby's listed like a lot of Stevie Wonder as well. I think looking backwards, that would be who I immediately jumped to as who would sort of be, in my opinion, his biggest influence in terms of his sound. But yeah, once again, I feel like I'm a broken record this week, but I definitely enjoyed this album. It snuck up on me a little bit. And yeah, so I guess I'll kick to you, Matt. What did you think?
I thought it was Josh's take.
Yeah,
Josh's
take. I'm sorry.
No problem. Yeah, this was I really enjoyed this album. In fact, it's my album of the week for this one. I've kind of gone back and forth with the R&B stuff. I know, John, you really like the Quiet Storm stuff, but this is the type of R&B I like. And I agree. It sounds really modern, and his voice is really the standout on this album. You can tell in the production.
James Brown, too, I should mention.
Yes,
he sounds a lot like him.
I wrote down James Brown. He doesn't have as much of the kind of like theatrics and dance move type of, complimenting behavior to that, I would say.
I think his show did, though, have a fair amount of that. But like in terms of the but
I can definitely see it. Same thing with early Michael Jackson. I think I got some of that as well. And there's a slight pop sensibility to this album that I responded to. But yeah, his voice is the real standout on this, and he's got some range and he uses it in different ways a lot. And then he also adds backing singers at really like interesting and key times throughout different songs that really kind of complement and boost his voice. It's another kind of real mix of genres, not just R&B, but there's soul. I feel like sometimes there's even like some gospel elements to it. There's like I can't believe I forgot. You know who else is Bruno Mars is a lot of the sound of this album too at different times, especially like Dance Little Sister. Yep. Mm-hmm. And he adds some like chanting or kind of like, I don't know. I kept trying to figure out how to describe it. It's like from the first track, If You All Get to Heaven, it's almost like spoken word chanting or something, and he uses that a couple times throughout, like in 7 More Days too. It adds like almost like this religious element to the songs, or kind of like some weight to it in some way. Spiritual,
would you say? More so, yeah.
like the old Negro spiritual, as they used to say. And also has I feel like the emotion really comes through. There's some like mysteriousness to him. There's some playfulness and loving, but also like longing and kind of like searching type of songs on here. There's definitely like a throwback vibe too,
like Sign Your Name sounds like it could be a Sade song. Yeah.
Yeah, and I was familiar with Wishing Well and Sign Your Name by song, not that I didn't know who sang those songs, but I recognized them. And even something on like Wishing Well that has like a whistle aspect to it. The songs are constructed really interestingly, and it seems like there's a lot of like session musicians, or I don't know, a lot of ideas that are being thrown around that really work and cohere together for me.
Well, a note I wrote for myself, Josh, is I get the feeling that this is what Matt wanted Stevie Wonder to sound like. So when you get to him, I'll be wondering if I'm right or if it's just still a barrier. So yeah.
And similar to Fine Young Cannibals too, I think there's some like Otis Redding and Sam Cooke inspiration
for sure
on this. Like Who's Loving You, the last track is definitely an homage to them, I feel like. And so
or Smokey Robinson is who I got from that one a little bit.
Yeah. So I think that those pulls from the past mixed with kind of all the other genres, while I agree it does sound modern too. So all of that together really worked for me, and I was really entertained by this album, and I thought all of the tracks were pretty strong, and yeah, it got a big thumbs up from me. I'm glad we stuck this one in here.
Yep. So another artist, I didn't know anything about this guy. I don't know if the name was vaguely familiar, and that was about it. So this was all new to me. And yeah, I kind of pretty much agree with just about everything that you guys were saying. I think it's interesting that I did not come up with many, like, it's gonna be funny. I like all the artists that you had mentioned, particularly you, John, like you're just rattling off. I'm like, yep, I see that. Yep, you're right. Yep, and it's none of those things came to my mind.
That's because your R&B is still a developing creature. Right. Your knowledge, yes. Mm-hmm.
I would much rather listen to this than almost all the Stevie Wonder records that we covered. Like this was way more, I don't know, accessible for me. Varieties here for sure. I agree, the voice is the standout. Although the one track I didn't like was the one that was the acapella As Yet Untitled. Like that.
I like that song.
It was fine. It didn't need to be 5.5 minutes. You know, it wore out its welcome, I think.
I'm on Josh's side on that one. I enjoyed that.
He's got a powerful.
It's like a
voice
D'Angelo.
sure.
It's what D'Angelo would do.
Is
later,
it? Yeah.
You know?
It's.
Yeah. How does it feel?
I'd rather have some music behind that, I guess, is what, but
it's only one track, so
it's just one. Right. It wasn't. Yes. And actually the last track is a Smokey Robinson track.
Is it?
Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Oh, is it really?
It is. Yep. Yep.
Oh, I was gonna say it sounds like Smokey Robinson. I had no idea it was him. Yeah.
Yeah, it's the one cover on the record. So yep.
I promise I didn't cheat on that. That was me just saying that sounded like Smokey Robinson.
So he's his voice is great. There is the variety here. It's the old spiritual. It's like the Civil War. Kind of like the, you can just, it's like kind of harkens back to that time where you're kind of, it's like the mourning and
it's like a call and response type of
it's like I just think it's a spiritual. It's like it's actually where a lot of popular music came from, to be honest. The blues, right? It's became from slaves, from people that were just down and out, and they were just they used spirituals to kind of bring some levity, or not levity necessarily.
It's got some elements of gospel too.
Yeah.
Is probably another. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And that's where God. Yeah, right. But gospel, I think, it all came from that, right? So, so that's certainly here. There's more upbeat, poppier stuff. I really liked. I thought some of the mellow stuff was great too. Like I really liked 7 More Days. I liked Rain. Kind of the more of the mellow songs. Actually, the one thing that I came up with in terms of like artists, like, man, this sounds a little like so and so, was the second track, If You Let Me Stay, sounded like Michael Bolton to me, to be quite honest. Like the way, like
I did not get that.
Like he's got like, because his voice goes in the raspy. Like when he belts out some of the notes.
I love how even your soul singers are white guys, Matt. That's my favorite thing.
Well, Michael Bolton. Well, it's like he was so ubiquitous, and it was just like, I can't take this guy, and it just became such a parody of things. But like,
I Michael Bolton's he was ubiquitous though. Like he wasn't ubiquitous where I grew up. Like I mean, you knew him, but like he was very much like a different. I think it was kind of like if you didn't have access to like urban radio, like Michael Bolton gave you elements of it like congealed for you, because I don't think of like Michael Bolton. I know he sold a ton of albums, but like he very much existed on MTV, but it was never on the radio near me. When people
I don't remember him, but that's the thing.
They listen to R&B,
That's the thing. Like I can't point to where like, oh, I always heard Michael Bolton on MTV or on this particular radio station. It was just, he was just there. Like he just existed. In this, this element here and that element there, and it was just, and so that song kind of had a little bit more of the If You Let Me Stay had a little bit more of that 80s do 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 do, like kind of like a synthetic vibe. And then when he belted it out, I was like, I could see Michael Bolton singing this because that raspy voice. It was a similar kind of tone to the voice, but this is certainly better than I will say that than any Michael Bolton stuff I heard. But so yeah, I like the variety here. This was yeah, I didn't know any of it before, and generally speaking, I enjoyed it, and I think, except with the exception of that one song, but yeah, good
it's
stuff.
Funny you process that way too, because like when I hear "If You Let Me Stay," it reminds me of like what Kurt Franklin would do later, like the
I don't know
gospel
who Kurt
singer
Franklin is.
God's Property, well. Kurt Franklin. I bet you know that one song.
Yeah. Okay. Anyway, but that's for those heads that know, right? Like that's kind of like it's that that pop version of gospel, right? It's kind of like I felt like that a little bit of what you're going with the background vocals and stuff like that. So that's.
But there's a lot of there's a lot of accessibility here. Like I could see this being a record that even for someone like me that's not really well versed in soul or R&B, it's like that was an easy. Kind of listen. Like it, I felt like it took me a couple listens to kind of grasp a little bit because it seemed like it was kind of jumping from one thing to the next. So, but I was fine with that. I think that's good. I think that every direction that he took for the most part was pretty good. So, I'm thumbs up.
I feel like too that his voice sounds so natural on this. I think a lot of production nowadays kind of takes out the imperfections of artists or just straight up auto tunes them, but this you can hear kind of like him like either breathing or like especially on As Yet Untitled, like kind of adjusting his voice or small cracks or like
or the Smokey cover something. Because he doesn't always hit it. He lets his voice kind of crack a little bit to get across the emotion. Yeah. So
I really like that too. It felt more, I don't know, like stripped down or almost like an unplugged album or something at some times, even though I think there's a lot of production value on this, but yeah, I liked it a lot.
Yeah. That Who's Lovin' You song was written in 1960 by Smokey. It was recorded by the Miracles and as well as the Temptations and the Supremes.
Wow. So yeah, this is a pretty darn big album, both in the UK and the United States. This was a top 10 album in the US. So, and wow. He was nominated for a bunch of Grammys, and he was really considered to be like the next big thing.
What happened to him?
You can kind of see it. It just kind of he released some very ambitious albums that kind of walk that line between being arty and being, a lot of people described as either pretentious or overstuffed or taking chances that didn't work, and then there was sort of like a spiritual period, so it kind of just was, I just don't think he ever released the album again, right, that resembled this, and people might have wanted a little bit more of the same of this one before they went in a different direction, and I think that was a little bit of what ended up hurting, the weight of expectations.
Well, he's got 12 albums, and his most recent one was actually in 2021.
I think a lot, though, were like in the 2000s, right? You went through like a run of them.
Let's see.
Those titles are very ambitious.
Yeah. Vibrator.
Looking at them.
Yes.
89.
Terence Trent D'Arby's Vibrator, yes.
89, 93, 95, 2001, 05. That's every 4 or 5 years he's doing an album. 06, that was two back-to-back. 09, 11. Yeah, he's been around. He's still kicking. 2021 was the last out record. So, Pandora's Playhouse.
And he is 61 years old now, which seems kind of hard to believe. But
he was 25 when this record came out.
25 when this came out, and 61 now. So wow, it does not seem like that much time has passed, does it? But there you go.
Yeah.
So. Okay. Well, yeah. Thumbs up from all of us. It sounds like. So the first half of this show is filled with albums that have